Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another TopSoil webinar. As always, I'm Mitchell Hora. I'm the founder and CEO here at Continuum Ag. Got a special guest with me today, John Carroll. Excited to dig in on stuff with John. He's got some of the most impressive stuff going on by far of the farmers that we're working with, but just overall in business and stuff too. Lots that we want to dig into. Lots that I'm excited to dig into with you, John. We'll get back into that here in just a little bit. Let me tee things up. For those that don't know, on Continuum Ag, we're a software company based in Southeast Iowa, built by farmers for farmers. We focus on soil health, and that's the long term. We've got to build soil health, but carbon intensity is a huge opportunity. We've been preaching on it, and I'm sure a lot of you are hearing us talk about it. John and I are going to dig into that. John and I have had lots of conversations about carbon and carbon intensity, so we'll dig in on his perspective. But this all boils down to data. No matter what, we've got to be managing and focus on good data. That if you want to get paid, it's going to take data, but also data is key for making smart decisions. And we're building businesses here, we're leading businesses. We've got to focus on data. So, but with John, I'm going to talk about kind of course, his intro and what they've got going on with Carroll Family Farms and the variety of other businesses that John is running. We're going to talk about sustainability, going to talk about carbon, going to talk about carbon intensity and kind of where this is all going. There's been an array of projects that John has been involved with in the sustainability realm, though, since before carbon intensity was the newest, coolest thing. Maybe hitting on some next generation fuels and stuff too, and talk about just business strategy, how to really build out teams and building teams in multiple continents. But before we get there, I've got to give our plug for the TopSoil Summit. Hopefully you all have gotten registered. If not, Diana did get the link is in there, continuum.ag, and you can find the events and stuff. But the TopSoil Summit is on Monday, and we're nearing capacity. But here's what the whole day. You can see more of this on the website as well. But a lot of discussion about carbon intensity. We're going to start the day with really setting the stage on carbon intensity. We have Monty Shaw coming from the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association. He's the president, the director of the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association. So he's going to be really laying out the landscape here in Iowa. Then we're going to go into our partners panel. So kind of laying out the groups that we've aligned ourselves with to help to verify the CI scores, get those scores into the marketplace, communicate with the IRS, and ultimately monetize these tax credits. I'm going to give more of a keynote to giving some insight onto the fun projects and things that I've been building and where we are going. We do have some folks coming from USDA that are slated to come in. Chevron is going to be there. Our biofuel, one of our biofuel partners over at Siouxland Energy, they're going to be here. We're going to have the farmers on stage sharing their thoughts. Guys like Kelly Garrett, that's been deep into the space for a number of years. Brandon Honeycutt from National Corn Growers. Kevin Reed is one of our very prominent local farmers, long-term soil health-minded farmers. And Ryan Oberman, he won our Dirty Glove Award last year for having the lowest CI score of 2023. So we've got Ryan going to come and share his story as well. And we've got Southwest Airlines coming. They actually have been putting a ton of investment into the sustainable aviation fuel space. So we've got Astri coming to talk about that. And we're going to wrap up with having those folks come on with more Q&A, answering your questions and digging in. Then we'll go to the farm and have a cocktail after that, maybe a couple cocktails after that. But all right, I'll come back to this here. But let me stop sharing and turn things over to my special guest. More info about the TopSoil Summits on the website. Go to continuum.ag, you'll find it. But John, bummed that you're not going to be able to join us at the TopSoil Summit next week. That's kind of what prompted some of this was we got to get you here sometime and get you on at the summit. But I appreciate you taking the time and joining me on a webinar here instead. And yeah, John, I mean, one of the most impressive farms that I've seen, like by a lot. We've been able to spend a lot of good time together. Appreciate you taking the time, not just today, but over the last couple of years too. We've had some awesome discussions, and you hosted us down in Brazil and the whole 9 yards. So, but anyway, John, I'll turn it over to you. Set the stage. tell who you are and who is Carroll Family Farms.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for having me here today. And yeah, bummed I'm going to miss the summit again. June is the month that I'm normally in Brazil. So I have operations down here, and it is once the kids get out of school, we normally come down here for about a month and spend some time with the teams. So I am fifth generation on our family farm based in Carthage, Illinois. So traditionally row crop, corn, soybeans, pigs, for the last 100 years or so. And I would say a pretty traditional operation, up until 25 years ago or so. And when I was in school, in college, went to Western Illinois University and had some opportunities while I was doing my MBA to come down to Brazil on some study abroad. This was a time when there was a lot of stuff going on in the farm magazines about the new frontier and new land to open. And so it was an opportune time to visit, and given that opportunity through through the university. And my dad actually signed up as a student as well, so that he could come along. So he was a college dropout that had just made it a semester. So he was actually a freshman officially.
That's awesome. I didn't know that part of the story.
Yeah.
And you guys were in Brazil. Is down in southern Brazil? Is that right?
Yeah, these things were with universities down in southern Brazil.
Yeah.
But we kind of got our eyes open pretty quickly to what was going on, and we found a person out of the U.S. that was taking investment tours down into the newer developing regions, and so we ended up coming on a number of trips down here. Basically decided, or I was given the choice of. I always knew for sure I was going to farm, but if I wanted to say I would, commit to coming down here right after college and running this, starting up this operation, the family would put capital in for it. And I had to commit to being here for at least 5 years. And so I said, yes, I would do it. We bought a farm in September of 2002. I was dating a girl at the time. I told her, hey, if I ask you to marry me, along with that comes moving to Brazil. So say no if you don't want to go, because I'm going. And so she ended up saying yes. And we came down here for the first crop over Christmas vacation. We were both still in school. And then May of 2003, we both graduated, me as an MBA, her as a CPA, and we graduated, got married. We took our honeymoon in Brazil and took a bus to the farm, all in May of June of 2003. And the operation started off down here as just a pretty typical soybean farm, but quickly became a cotton farm just by the second year. I'd never seen cotton before. Maybe I'd seen some cotton stubble, like driving to Disney World when I was 9 or something in Georgia, but that was it.
Not much cotton in Western Illinois.
Not much cotton in Western Illinois. So there were other people in the U.S., people that we knew, people that maybe were landlords of ours who knew us, had known us for a long time, and were interested in getting some financial exposure in Brazil. And so they came and said, hey, if we give you money, will you figure out how to deploy this down there? So very quickly grew, and within 5 years, we were up to about 30,000 acres of cotton and a cotton ginning operation, and a couple hundred employees. So I was 22 and my wife was 21 when we moved here. And I say, if it hadn't been for ignorance, we wouldn't have done it, just didn't know any better. But that's how things got going. And today, just a snapshot of today then. So my wife and I ended up living here for 10 years full time. We now spend more time in the US, but I come down here about 5 times a year. We bring the kids a couple times a year. and I'm the CEO of our Brazilian holding company, which has three businesses under it. One is our traditional farming operation, ag real estate, corn, soybeans, pigs, cotton, cattle. The other one is our services business. So that is helping both Brazilians and foreigners who want to be invested in Brazil run their businesses, tax compliance, farm management. And a third one is a lending business. So we raise funds from investors and we lend them out to Brazilian farmers. And the U.S. continue to be a pretty typical, beginning to be less typical, fully integrated corn, soybean, pig operation, right? So there's not very many of us independents left out there on the hog side, but that's what we do there. Kind of, we're right west central Illinois, so Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, but all there in a pretty, within 50 or 60 miles of Carthage, Illinois.
Yeah. And yeah, your stuff here, well, in both countries, very integrated, right? Where you, at least here in the US, where you've got some ability to grow corn, soybeans, grind it, feed it to the pigs, but you guys have your own genetics and stuff too, I think is an important thing, right? That you're not necessarily growing pigs for somebody else. Like you're not contract feeding. It's all thoroughly like integrated and independent, which to your point, becoming quite rare. At least,
yeah, it is. And whether there's a space for us 20 years from now, I don't know. But we're some of the few left still doing that.
Really going. Let me I pulled up the map here because I think it's gonna be important and showing people what are we actually dealing with, okay? Because I'm sure a lot of folks on were like me when I first met you, where I knew nothing about Brazil. So I clicked on Luis Eduardo, right, to show that's kind of where you guys are farming, or pretty darn close.
Yep.
Essentially where you guys are headquartered down there. But just for some context and stuff, right? That I think one of the things that most farmers wouldn't be aware of is we're at 9, quarter after 9 Central Time, but where you are, what it would be 11? Are you guys 2 hours?
Yeah, I'm just 2 hours ahead of you. Yep.
So yeah, so way further east than where we are here in Iowa. So that was one of the things I wanted to kind of point out that I didn't really think about, right? We think of Brazil.
Yeah, all of Brazil is east of Michigan.
So. Yeah. So way further east, but also what's important here too, and where you're farming is that pin is pretty dang close to this dashed line of the equator compared to up here in Iowa. Maybe start with telling a little bit more of you guys' weather is obviously one of challenge number one amongst a lot of other challenges down there, but maybe speak to that a little bit on you guys' growing season and how it's different in Brazil versus the operation up here in the US.
Sure. So yeah, like you said, we're just 13 degrees off of the equator, which means that our day lengths don't change very much. And we do not have summer and winter as you typically think of in the US. So it's 80 degrees today and sunny, and that will be every day for 365 days a year. Mm-hmm. So while there's plenty to complain about, the weather is not one of those things.
Yeah.
We're also at 3,000 feet elevation, so it's not humid where we are. So we have a rainy season and a dry season. So our rainy season starts in kind of with the monsoon, starts in October, goes through April, and that's when we grow our crops, right? So we plant in October, and parts of Brazil, you see the state of Mato Grosso there. That's the big one I'm sure you've heard of. That is directly to the west of us. Massive producer. They have a longer rainy season than we do. They grow 2 crops. We grow a single crop where we are, but it's a high yielding. We would have the highest yielding soybeans and corn in Brazil of anywhere. Sure. And that's partially because we have just a really long full season. So we grow 140 day soybeans where we are. They're group, 9s.
Yeah.
So our 5-year average on soybeans would be around 70 or something, where, Mato Grosso might be the upper 50s.
Yeah. And yeah, so when I was down, so then for everyone context, of course, too, you got the Amazon up here a lot further north, where the spot that you guys were in was not rainforest, never has been rainforest.
Right.
So something important to hit on there, where over in Mato Grosso, you'd be getting into part of it, but a lot of that was still like pretty rough country, not necessarily what I'd qualify as rainforest. Until you
Yeah. So
start further north.
northern Mato Grosso is rainforest. The big restrictions there on clearing. You can just clear 20%. You can clear 20% of your property. 80% has to be left in its natural state. Um, but the rest of southern part of Mato Grosso and then all across, these next states over to Bahia, that is all what they call Cerrado, which means, well, it's kind of a scrub brush is what it was. So a very weathered soil, no natural nutrients in it. Basically, we had to put everything in it to get it up to be able to grow crops.
Get up to par, but it's got rain. That's the key.
It's got
Rain,
rain. Yeah,
consistent
plenty of rain.
temperature, and it's a growing medium that you can
Right.
grow on. And it's not quite as flat as the desk that I'm sitting at, but not that far from it.
Not too far from it. Yeah. So, our largest field is 11,450 acres, and it doesn't have one dry dam, one waterway. It's just a rectangle.
You watch your dog run away for a long time down there on that farm.
Yeah.
Your guys, so that's actually, we should hit on that because I think a lot of people will enjoy that. How do you harvest that, right? So, I mean, you've got to have multiple grain carts like following along that combine because you can't make it very far and your grain cart's full and they got to go back and you got to get another grain cart.
Yeah. Well, in the US, you farm the longest direction of your field usually, and you can't do that here because a lot of our farms, the way it works out, are about 7.2 miles long. And so it does not work to have 7.2 mile one way. So we farm them the short direction, which might be mile rounds or something. So we're going to have to farm them in a way that works with our machinery.
That was a funny part on that is one of the first times I was playing around like with your fields and stuff in topsoil that I pop up the maps. I'm like, oh, okay, kind of square fields. They're not directly north and south like we got here in Iowa and in Illinois where it's all nice and square and all sectioned off. These are on angles and stuff. It's like, oh, it just looks like some fields, and then I click and it's like 9,000 acres or 11,000 acres. Oh, jeez. Okay. So the scale a little bit different, but that's how everyone is down there.
Right.
A lot of them in your neck of the woods, right? Maybe speak to that a little bit. That like, okay, yeah, this is a huge operation, right? 30,000 acres, but like that's not abnormal, and you're far from being the largest.
That's right. Yeah. I think certainly land traditionally over the last 20 years has not been as scarce here as it has been in the US, right? In the Midwest. So farmers that were willing to expand were able to expand, where in the US, even if you're willing, there's just not land for sale, right? You pick up an 80 or 160, or maybe you're able to rent a few hundred acres in a good year. That's kind of it. But I think the change that made, and this is probably more in the management side than in the carbon side, but because farms were able to grow so quickly without that scarcity of land, farmers were required to become business managers and business leaders as opposed to operators. In the US, if you add an 80 or 160, you can get a little bigger equipment or run a few more hours and you get it done. Down here, if you go from 5,000 to 10,000 to 30,000 acres, you simply can't. There's no way that you can go out and affect it yourself. And so there's some people who were able to do that and were successful at it and have just continued to grow, and so then you get into some monster, operations with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of acres, which you don't see in the US.
No. But so in your neck of the woods, yeah, there's some Americans around and been able to be successful like you guys, but most of the farmers that you're neighbors with down there, they're local guys that their families are all from Brazil and stuff, right? Like, I mean, for the most, at least when I was down there, I was down there with you in September of last year, I think it was. And I mean, yeah, the Americans were very few and far between.
Yeah, there's like 4 of us. So
Yeah. But
yeah,
maybe speak to that, because I think obviously that's why you've been able to be successful, is you've been able to be just as Brazilian as you are American. And from the outside looking in anyway. Like, I'm assuming that's a big part of why plenty of other folks that attempted to do what you did, they're not still in Brazil. They didn't make it. They sold out.
it's hard to say what those things were. You can't rule out just luck, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes things just work out. Um, some other things that helped us were, we were family funded, right? We weren't counting on a bank. We weren't counting on outside investors. And so that's harder if you're raising money and you're working with third parties, and things do not go as expected in startups, right?
Yeah.
And your yields aren't as high as you thought they were going to be, and the price wasn't as high as you thought it was going to be, and everything costs more than you thought it was going to cost. And if that's how you start out and you got to go back to investors and keep asking for more money, that's tough. And if investors don't want to put in more money, then you got to try to get lending, and interest rates are very high in Brazil. So that was an advantage on having a family that was supporting it and understanding of those things during the startup phase. And another one was, I was raised as a farmer and knew I was going to farm, as opposed to maybe somebody who came down very well intentioned, very interested in succeeding, but if you weren't raised with that and didn't have any background, and you were just relying on consultants in Brazil to decide what to do with fertilizer and crop protection and varieties, with all the other new things you have to learn operating in Brazil, that's a tough one to just tack on having that background as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Because at least knowing some understanding of how you grew up doing it, and although it's different context, you can at least just adjust for the context of that
Right.
operation.
Absolutely.
One of those things that you guys have been dabbling with down there is no-till, cover crops, trying to diversify and doing these things, just like what you're doing in the US as well. Maybe speak to that a little bit from the soil health lens of what's going on down in Brazil.
Sure. And maybe I'll start with the reason we got headed in that direction was twofold. Part agronomics, and part this desire you see amongst the marketplace, just people in general, the population in general, this liking this thought of sustainability, and then the companies that are our buyers of our products that were also talking, like begging for someone to tell them. They've got consumers saying we want sustainable or regenerative, and they're going, we don't really know what that is or how to do that or how to measure it. Please just measure something and tell us what you're doing, because we don't know what to do. And we figured we'd rather create that story than have someone else create it for us, because I think we really do have some idea of what is more sustainable than something else.
Sure.
And maybe we should be the ones starting down that road and then adjusting as time goes. So, we were continuous cotton for years. I mean, we had farms that were continuous cotton for 10 years.
Yeah.
And that was a mistake. I can see, looking back, I believe that was a mistake. Cotton is a 180-day crop for us. And once we get into the dry season, there is no rain, there's not a drop of rain. And so there was no opportunity for any cover crops.
Right.
So all we had was cotton, which is like planting billions of little trees and then trying to kill them all at the end of the year, which is like heavy mechanical tillage. It's the only way you get them killed. And that was hard on our soils. And despite all the things we were learning and improvements in varieties and getting better at operating, our yields were decreasing. Our soils were losing resiliency in drier weather.
Yeah.
And we lost a lot of soil structure through this constant mechanical tillage. So I thought that we could overcome that through just operations and technical know-how, and I was unsuccessful at it.
Right.
And so about the same time, you had cotton prices starting to fall, corn and soybean prices working up. So well, let's work some rotations in here.
Yeah.
And that's kind of when we started more corn and soybeans, more rotation, more no-till, and we started to see some results from that. And down here, a lot of that's about water, right? So we have a very sandy soil, but we get a lot of rain. Really, we get way more rain than we can ever use,
No.
but it doesn't always come exactly when you need it, right? And when you have no cover on top of the ground and you have had lots of tillage, you do not save very much. You don't save near as much of that water as you could when it does rain. And that's what we started to notice as we got into more no-till and more cover crops, is that we were saving a lot. We were saving more of that moisture for when those dry periods came. So we decided that was really working well for us. We got into a lot more of just a corn soybean rotation with some cotton here and there, and then we added in. That allowed adding in the cover crops then, because they're harvested in time that you can still plant a cover crop and get some rainfall to get it going. And we decided that was really working well for us, and we went all in really on the cover crops, and believe we've had some amazing results from it. And then, like I talked about on the other side, we have a buyer starting to talk about what they're looking for. And about the same time, I heard Mitchell speak at a conference, reached out to him, and decided with what Mitchell was charging was not some extravagant number. And we believe that this data may have value in the future. We don't know what that's going to look like. And we didn't even know what to measure, and Mitchell didn't either. No. So we just said, let's start measuring some things. And it doesn't cost that much more to measure extra. And so let's kind of go beyond on the measurement and storing of data, and then we'll kind of pick out what's needed as we go forward.
Yeah.
So that's how we started in a few years ago. And you kind of find out as you do this that there's a lot more talk about it than there are things actually being done. Because when you go out to buyers, right, and you say, hey, I've got this grain or this oil that I've produced, and it has a CI score with it, and it has all this data that goes along with it. And they're like, oh, we've heard talk about that. We don't really know many other people that are, anybody actually comes to that has any of that, or how to do it, or we don't know really how to pay for it. Yeah. But we did get our first, last year, 2023, we were able to, through Continuum, get our first paycheck, from a company. It was on the U.S. side of our operations for the data we collected, and easily paid for anything that we'd done with any cost that we had with Continuum. And the great thing was that we also got all the agronomic benefits out of doing those things, right? So,
and that's obviously the whole thesis and stuff here too, right? And yeah, when you and I first connected, it was like, hey, how do we figure out how to do this carbon stuff in the US, but in Brazil? And I'm like, I have no freaking clue. Like, I'm trying to figure it all out myself, right? And yeah, the Nestle project that you guys were involved in last year in the US, that was also the first time that we monetized our carbon and our story. We've been in this for forever too, just like you guys. And that is the same. That's the only time we've been able to monetize it either. But first, for a little context on folks that are on here too, what we did in Brazil, where we're like, hey, what is the opportunity here? We have no idea, right? There's no carbon programs down there. And even in the US, like, there's not one that we necessarily go and say, hey, you should go sign up for this thing. So what we did was we just said, well, let's quantify what we're doing, right? Document all the management data, which you guys have obviously been amazing at documenting everything already, because you have to. You got to control and you got to document everything and make sound decisions. But number two, we went and did soil data, some soil sampling with dry combustion organic carbon and bulk density samples, which was a challenge in and of itself in Brazil. But we got it done, and at least have a baseline of early enough baseline of here's what our soil carbon is, and now we can monitor it over time. And I don't know. I believe that we're going to find the right opportunities at some point. And I don't know. I mean, shoot, you and I have talked with a lot of different groups. I've talked with a bunch of different companies and presented some of them to you. And like, it's still going to take navigating through all this, even
Yep.
with a lot of data, plenty of size to be able to make it worth it for worth their while, worth our while. And still, it just kind of is sitting and waiting. But to your point, at least in the short term, seeing it is about soil health. And that's why I always start with that too, as I'm teeing up who is Continuum Ag. Well, number one, we got to build soil health, and we got to start with that. That's the long-term agronomic returns, resiliency that nobody can take away. And as the goalposts change, sound agronomics is always still going to be there.
Yep.
But you're seeing this shift here now, right? So we're kind of monitoring in Brazil, and I think there will be some opportunities there. We're still navigating through all that, and there'll be some stuff emerge, and we could do some stuff, but it's not quite the right fit. But
yeah, they were tying us into longer term contracts than we really wanted to get into at this point. And
yeah.
I think it's kind of when we signed up with Continuum, I thought about it kind of like buying an option, right? You're spending some money on the possibility that it's going to be worth a lot more in the future. And sometimes options expire without value, and we were willing to take that risk because of the upside potential.
Yeah.
I
think that's spot on too. And it's actually exactly how we're thinking about the CI thing as well. Now, obviously, I think we're going to have the carbon intensity opportunity in Brazil at some point, but what's missing is the quantification methodology, where in the US, we have the GREET model, right? We have the US Department of Energy, we have the GREET model. They developed this consistent standard tool for quantifying CI, and we can leverage that here. It's not built for Brazil or for any other country for that matter, besides Canada for their corn, but it just takes more science and more development of all this stuff. But in Brazil, there's not necessarily all that government support and all these different programs and land grant universities and stuff. There's some of it going on, but it's not near to the extent that it is in the US, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We don't have, well, there's no government, really, no government support. We do have, Embrapa, which kind of like the USDA, that does do a pretty good job on the research side at understanding what's working from from a cover crop perspective, from rotational advantages, and they're pretty good about getting that information out to farmers.
So a little bit of some extension type stuff there.
Right, extension type stuff. Yep.
Yeah, cool. So what we're seeing in the US though, there's seems to be a lot more emerging opportunities for what we're doing here. And again, hopefully, I think it is going to translate to Brazil at some point, but maybe speak to that a little bit. That obviously we did some of the carbon project last year with Nestle, but you're producing all kinds of different new products and new stuff on your operations up here in the US. And there's emerging fuel markets like renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel that could be opportunities for farms like yours. Maybe speak to that a little bit. That you're in a unique spot, that you're not only producing the corn and soybeans that could go to a different processor, but you guys are crushing your own soybeans and have soy oil, that there's some potential opportunities emerging there too.
Yeah, so we feed all of our corn and soybean production on the farm. And so one thing potentially is because of our closed loop system and independent hog producers, we can maybe track better than about anybody what our CI score is on a pig, right? Because we know where all the corn and all the beans came from, and we're using all that manure back on the fields, which does well in the GREET model on tracking CI. So we're well positioned to understand the carbon intensity of a pig. Now, whether anybody will pay for that, we don't know yet, right? That's part of that option of what we're hiring, what we're paying Continuum for. I asked my dad one time if he'd eat a bowl of live crickets for $20. He says, I've done a lot worse on the farm for a lot less money. So yes. And so, I don't want to compare paying Continuum to that, but
yeah,
I paid a lot more for a lot less.
A lot more for a lot less, yeah. At least we've gotten something out of it now. Not
Yeah.
we're not completely just only selling hopes and dreams. So that's good.
But yeah, we're crushing soybean, make our own soybean meal. And so part of that is we have oil as a byproduct. And this just started last November, so very new to us on selling into the oil market. And we had no idea. We had no idea what this looked like. This was kind of the byproduct, right? Was the oil. It was not our primary focus. But turns out, if you're going to make this work economically, it's a pretty important, you got to get good value. You got to get value out of this oil. And turns out, like anything, when you start looking at it, you think you know a lot more than you do after a few hours. And then, after a few days looking, you realize way less than you thought you did. And so I'm kind of on that curve now, learning what this looks like. But yeah, so we've got oil that has a CI score attached to it. We have all this talk about SAF and renewable fuel. Soybean as a feedstock for it. But then you start learning things like, well, it turns out maybe there's actually a lot of this market is being taken care of by used cooking oil coming out of China. That is maybe actually all just palm oil that had a little used cooking oil dumped into it to turn it into UCO. And so the market's pretty weak for soybean oil right now because it's being taken care of by this oil out of China. There's only, even with all this talk of SAF, there's virtually none up and going, right? There's a lot of projects in the works. There's a lot of discussion about it. Where the rubber meets the road, there isn't that much yet. And the renewable fuel part, really only a couple states that are, a couple plants in a couple states that have this going on, and they're all a long way away from Illinois. So then you're going to get into rail. How do you get this product moved across the country? So there's a market for crude soybean oil, right? We can get rid of it. We can get it dumped. Somebody will take it, and we can get some value out of it. But we believe we have more value there because of what we're tracking. But Mitchell and I are still on the search on how to monetize on that.
Correct. Yeah. And so with all this stuff, guys, and that's why I wanted to, obviously you guys are seeing why I was so excited to have John on, is there's so many moving parts to this where a lot of it, we've got some ability to control more rungs in the ladder than a lot of other folks can, right? Like on my farm, I'm growing the corn, soybeans, and then I'm kind of up against whatever the market's going to want to do with my corn and soybeans from there. And I can put a CI score on that. But in the hog operation, on average, 65% of the carbon footprint of pork production comes from the feed, 65%. Another huge chunk of it from the manure. And like what we're talking here, these guys have a much more closed loop system, reducing the CI of the feed significantly with the utilization of their own manure, of reduced tillage or even no till in a lot of cases, and cover crops. So we can really lower the CI of that big driver. But now, the missing thing is, all right, how do we monetize it? Where in the soybean oil side, we're looking at the renewable diesel and stuff. And I don't know, we've chatted with a couple different renewable diesel producers, and they're saying this soybean oil would be it's a lot cleaner product, it sounds like, right? A lot cleaner, a lot more consistent product versus what they're getting from a used cooking oil. That if it is actually used cooking oil, I mean, think of that, right? You would have all kinds of different stuff that's been cooked in it. I'm sure there's some floaties and stuff in it you got to strain out. And we got to be able to create a more consistent product if you are going to create renewable diesel or sustainable aviation fuel. So it looks like there's going to be opportunity there, but it all boils back to like where you're just talking, we got to get this stuff on rail. And there's a balance between some of the producers. Some of them are quite large, and therefore they need large supply of the soybean oil going to them. And other ones are super tiny, and therefore like maybe not necessarily worth their time of supplying to them. So I don't know. I mean, what do you say? I mean, that's a balance of all this stuff, I suppose, though, right? I mean, from corn, soybean production to and trying to grow commodities, that there's a balance to the size dynamic from pork production. And obviously that's where a lot of other folks haven't been able to navigate that like you guys have, that there's a balance to the size and to the economies of scale of all these things.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess how I look at it, and I'm weary about giving advice because I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing for sure either. But the way I think about it is we have some government tailwinds right now. And I believe they're increasing instead of decreasing when we think about this sustainability regenerative push. And we like to be on the correct side of a tailwind. Believe that's what we're doing in our work here with with Continuum and tracking this data, trying some of these things out. Because I believe longer term, the money to be made from it initially manifests itself as a premium for a product produced in a certain way, and that eventually becomes a discount to the market if you're the one that's not doing it. We've seen that, definitely seen that in the hog industry, right? So, open pen gestations. So we all had to, a bunch of us made that switch. You get a premium for it. And now we find out that, as we're looking at expansion in the US, there is no market for pigs from sows and stalls. So if you're going to do that, it's a discount. So I guess I'd think if you're going to have to do it, if you believe that there's this possibility that you're going to have to do it either way, it's just a question of timing. Let's get on the correct side of the tailwind right now. Let's start doing it, and let's capitalize on that premium while it's out there, because in the end, we're going to be doing it anyway.
100%. That's literally the thesis that I've got on this entire CI thing, that these carbon credit program stuff weren't working for my farm or for the mass majority of other farmers. And we've seen that on your operation as well. Like, these current programs aren't really working. The CI thing, maybe it's going to happen later this year because of 45Z. And if so, we're going to be ready for it. Let's roll. But it's where the puck is going. Like, I am just completely convinced that these groups are going to be asking for their scope 3 carbon footprint. It'll go into the pork side of things as well, that today the massive portion of the pork's carbon footprint is from the feed, and then the rest of the processing and transportation, all the rest of that stuff. These groups are going to be figuring this out, and it's where the puck is going. Hopefully we get that ROI in the next, less than 12 months. But if it's 24 or 36 months, I think we're going to be better off to capitalize on it now, because eventually it goes away. And we've seen that with all these different programs. And we always joke that this is coming from the Inflation Reduction Act, but eventually the money gets squeezed out because it drives up inflation. More money going into this space to incentivize a certain component. As you get more supply and the demand stays the same, more supply, same demand, the value goes down and it levels out and it becomes the norm. I think it's going to be a new plateau, right? Because then the next goalpost is going to be out there. For you guys, it was the open pens and Prop 12 stuff. And now we're talking about carbon, or it's going to be water quality, or it's going to be other sustainability metrics. And who knows? But I think people that are able to see that coming and be forward thinking, they're able to hopefully capitalize on it. And it takes taking big bets though too, and spreading out the risk, and as long as more of the bets come to fruition and minimize the downside of those that don't, I think we're going to be in a better position for it. There was we kind of answered the question here that's in the Q&A, and you guys, if you have other questions too, feel free to put them in. We're running short on time already because I had a lot of questions I wanted to dig into with you, John. But if we kind of answered this, so thoughts on just carbon credit programs and differences in carbon intensity versus some of these other carbon credits, and you can't stack is the last part of his question. You can't be in a carbon credit program and a CI program, but maybe speak to kind of your thought process on that. We kind of hit on before, we avoided the program down in Brazil because it was a 10-year contract. We're like,
yep.
It's just too risky. But maybe speak to that just from a higher level of perspective of how you think about long-term contracts and navigating the right programs and when it is the right time to sign your name on the bottom line.
Yeah. So if you look at the commitments that S&P 500 companies have made to, for their net zero by 2030 or 2040 or whatever it is, a lot of these are companies that they have no way to generate they have no way to make their own credits, right? They're not sequestering carbon in any way,
Sure.
right? So they have to do it through carbon. Would you call those offsets where you're purchasing
Offsets or insets or yeah, a variety of ways they could do it.
So if you just try to run the math out on those, it does not work, and it's definitely not going to work with credits worth $15 or $20 a ton. I don't see it.
Yeah.
So that's why we're not interested in getting into some long-term contract and selling a bunch of credits 10 years out for 15 or 20 bucks. And I don't even know if that's going to be the program, right? It may not turn out to be a carbon credit thing at all. But in order for these companies to do what they said they're going to do, carbon's going to have to be sequestered somewhere. There's going to have to be a reduction, and agriculture is one of the few places that you can actually do that. So we are, we're leaving ourselves. The way we're thinking about that, we're leaving ourselves more open to optionality, because we believe the value in the future will be more than the value in the present. And if it's not, you still got the option to
go back,
do whatever the
take the
present value
15
is,
bucks.
right? You
Yeah,
can still go
100%.
back and do that for the 15 bucks if you'd like.
Yeah, 100%. That's been my approach too, and that's why I like the CI space, is that there is no contract. All we're doing is the farmer owns their data. Sure, we're helping to get it quantified and get it verified, but the farmer owns it. The farmer gets to choose what they want to do, and we bring the opportunities to the table. And if you want to take one of those opportunities, game on. If you don't want to take one, that's fine too. But I don't know. I think things will continue to change, will emerge, and that's where I wanted to kind of pivot as we work towards wrapping here too. Is you guys' operations, obviously you have to think about things very differently, and obviously, John, you are running a business, right? You are a businessman with an MBA. Like, you have some schooling too to be a businessman, but you're running farm businesses because that's what you love, right? And that's what you grew up with, and that's where the passion is. And I think that's how I approach mine, the same way. But you guys utilize some systems. We've been able to connect on this, that at Continuum Ag, we use a system called EOS, the Entrepreneur Operating System, to think about long-term planning, a 10-year goal, which ours is to help 1 million family farms improve their profitability from improving their soil health. All right. We have that all over. You'll see that first thing on our website: soil health, farm profitability. Then we break that down into 3-year, 1-year, quarterly, monthly, weekly goals, and break it all the way down. You guys use a similar program, I believe. Scaling up, I think, is what you guys were using, right? But maybe speak to running a business here. It just happens to be a farming business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So ours is scaling up, and it's very similar to the EOS. A lot of the same jargon. And I think a lot of what it comes down to is one person kind of manage maybe 6, 7, 8 other people without a lot of structure around it, right? They're kind of there with those people, and they can keep everything moving forward and keep all the balls in the air. And I think if you look around, you find that a lot of businesses plateau there in and outside of agriculture. Because as they try to add more people and they don't put any structure around it, it becomes too much to juggle the balls with 20 people, and they start falling, right? And so this is about creating that this vision and these values, how we're going to do what we say we're going to do. Creating priorities and metrics to reach that longer term goal, and really hiring people not based off technical ability, but off of their values. And I poo-pooed that value stuff for a really long time as I got started. And I learned that when you're there with all these people every day, you kind of select who the people are that live those values, and you get rid of ones that don't. And even though you don't really think about it consciously, you're running a values-based system.
Yeah.
But what happens is as the team grows and you have more managers and different levels, different hierarchy, and you start to you lose that day-to-day contact, then you end up with these people that don't necessarily meet your values. And so many people, and including us, you hire based on technical skills, and you fire based on lack of values. And so today we look at that a lot differently. We are out there, simplicity and efficiency is our value number one. We'll give up economic returns to keep things simple and efficient. It's really what it comes down to. And to keep ourselves surrounded by people that are living those values, that's really what it's all about. And that's my day-to-day is all about, it's all about the people, having the right people doing the right things, and making sure that I'm getting people that are living those values, and getting rid of those ones that don't live it, because ultimately you can't micromanage all these people. So they have to just learn to not come to you with problems, just do things that make sense with our values, and you're not going to get in any trouble.
Yep.
Right. And move forward.
No, it's great. We've had to really work through it on our side too, and really put a major focus on those core values. And we've had core values for a long time, but I mean, I think just like what you had said, we had them, and sure, they were there. And when we were small, like, okay, just kind of naturally did its thing. But now as we've, grown to that, we got to really put a focus on them when we're hiring, firing, reviewing, and rewarding people. We've got to make sure that we're really sticking to those values and stuff. So, and yeah, to your point, like the business gains happen because now people are aligned with the core values. They know what the vision is, and they're able to make the right judgment calls and do what they need to do because they align with the values and are working towards that same common mission. But all right, the last couple things here, and we'll call her good here because my phone could tell it's been a long weekend because my phone's just been blowing up while we've been sitting here. And I actually have my first EO forum meeting here later today. So I'm really excited. My first full-blown EO actual meeting is later today. So I got to go and get ready for that here too. But my buddy Pat says outside of carbon, we're seeing demand from insetting programs for like other practice changes and stuff like that. And Pat, we had mentioned that both my farm and John's farm and a bunch of our other farmers, we participated in an inset program with Nestle last year, and we tag teamed that with Arva. And they were paying just for carbon though. And that's kind of like what you're looking at on the soybean oil side of things. And if there's any type of money to be had there, it'd be somewhat of an inset, or really it's a carbon intensity program. In my mind, carbon insetting and carbon intensity are fairly close to the same. But are you, John, I mean, to his question, are you seeing any of those conversations pick up, whether it be in Brazil or from the meat packers or anything up here, any of this additional focus or things you can see coming down the pipeline from an insetting or looking internal to the supply chain, monetary opportunity?
Yeah. So not much concrete. What I can tell you is that your local or regional managers or buyers that you deal with know very, very little about this. They may have read something in a company communication, but it is not top of mind for them. Now, when you get up to the corporate side, there is someone in corporate who has been tasked with meeting these goals that they've set out for 2030 or 2040. And these people are desperate to find something, right? Because it's really hard. Yeah. They weren't given much direction about what they're supposed to do or how they're supposed to do it. All they were told is net zero by 2040, find some things to do.
Yeah. Right?
And so I think that's where we picked up the most traction is you can actually find, you can go on these corporate websites and you can send an email out, and these people will respond to you because they're not quite sure what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And they really like it when a farmer reaches out to them with a potential solution. Yeah.
No, that's spot on. It's exactly what I've been seeing too. I literally had a call yesterday from a gal that's with a large multinational, and she's American, but she's stationed down in like Central Africa, trying to figure out how to do all this stuff down there. And I'm like, I have no idea. We've faced some challenges on the scale of an operation like mine or like yours, but you try to do it with a bunch of farms that are 2 to 30 acre farm, 2 acres to 30 acres. That's gonna be real tough. And how do you make any of these economics and stuff work and generate any type of real monetizable value. Like I'm like, hey, I don't know the answer, but here's what we're doing in the US, and maybe it'll translate. You guys can figure it out. But it is very interesting to your point, John, on like the sustainability people that are trying to navigate through all this, like they don't know and they need ideas and they're just trying to generate ideas, take it to the boss, get approval for a couple pilot programs and see what happens. But yeah, the folks at the local side of these companies, like they have no idea what's going on. They're
Yeah.
just getting the briefing from their boss or they're getting their internal communications from their companies and like until they're told here's what we're doing, they don't they don't know. They don't even know that those pilot projects and stuff are happening. But
And
I think
whether
it'll
it's
keep picking up.
political or ideological, your local person may not even be too interested in some of this stuff. They might not even like this idea of the
They might actually
sustainability
think
and
that this would be a
regen.
huge pain in the butt for them, and they're like,
Right.
"Oh
Exactly.
man, not this
So
crap."
you gotta skip over them sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely what we're finding. But I mean, in Pat's world, he's looking at okay, how can you build out programs? And by and large, though, I think the concept is absolutely correct. And it's really what we've been talking about here the whole time that the stuff that we are producing in our operations, we know how to create some value add on it. We know how to document it. We know how to get the data organized. We already have most of the data. And keeping that value associated with the product is where the puck is going in my mind. That sustainably produced pig or that low carbon pork, that low carbon intensity gallon of soybean oil that can go into sustainable aviation fuel. Like that's absolutely where the puck is going in all this stuff. And I think that's going to ultimately like avoid too many slices being taken out of the pie and create additional value uh, for the actual producers who are doing the work and stuff. So I don't know. I think it's moving in a good direction, but hopefully, to your point, John, we're way on the cutting edge, and hopefully it all comes to fruition. And if it does, we're going to be there sitting ready and waiting. And if the goalposts keep moving like they always do, we're gonna be ready for that too. So a couple other real quick things here as we wrap up. We do our chit chats every Tuesday at 7:45. If you have more questions, be sure to join me there. Another plug for the TopSoil Summit on Monday. It's the last couple days to get pre-registered, so be sure to get that locked in. All kinds of stuff on our TopSoil podcast on our YouTube page, and this recording will end up there as well. But John, appreciate you taking the time. It's been awesome. I again just really appreciate you, sharing and teaching me, and I think we're learning some stuff together through all this as well. I hope we are anyway, and looking forward to a lot more opportunities to come here as well. I think this is going to be a lot of good stuff coming down the pipe that hopefully we make more wins than bad bets and all this. And I think it's going to keep panning out. But appreciate you taking the time. Any parting thoughts on your side, John?
Yeah, we'll probably, if you watch this webinar in 10 years, we'll look back and think, man, we had no idea what we were doing then, but we're just kind of doing the best we know how with what we have. So
We're a couple years in at this point. We
yeah,
really didn't know what we were doing
yeah,
a while back. And but I think you're right. It's gonna be fun to look back on like, wow, like we're at the cutting edge of all of this. But these companies got to figure it out. And they're either going to control the narrative or we're going to control the narrative. And I think it's a lot better if we control the narrative. So with that, thanks everybody. Hopefully we'll see you on Monday. John, enjoy Brazil. Thanks for taking the time.
yeah. We'll see you. Thank you.